I'm Greg Jarboe with Search Engine Watch, and I'm here with Eric Enge of Stone Temple Consulting. And Eric, the world is waiting for you to reveal the results of your latest test. Now, your test is actually about Google Plus and the causation of search engine rankings. Can you, quickly for the audience, explain causation versus correlation?
Sure. There have been some fantastic studies actually by SEO Moz and Searchmetrics as well, where they've done some measurements to see what factors correlate with each other, in particular with search rankings. And these things have shown that plus ones and Google Plus shares and even likes and Facebook shares correlate really well with high rankings. But these have caused a number of firestorm-like debates in the industry. And people have rapidly and vehemently pointed out that causation and correlation really aren't the same things. And there's a lot of things that are correlated. I did some research on this. One of my favorite is that there's a strong correlation between ice cream consumption and drowning deaths. And my conclusion, therefore, is that the drowning is causing the consumption of the ice cream, but I probably have it backwards. And in any case, it turns out they both happen while it's hot out. And that's really kind of what's the causation there. But what these studies have done has really been valuable, I think, in terms of helping us understand digital marketing today from a more holistic basis. But what they haven't shown is whether or not these social sharing activities cause search rankings. And this is what we set out to do, was to do a study where we could measure whether or not social shares, and in particular for this study, Google Plus shares, would cause changes in search ranking.
So how do you set that up? I mean, if so many people have skinned the cat in terms of correlation, how do you set up a test to test causation?
That's a heck of a question. And it was very, very difficult. But basically, to give you the short version of it, we took a set of web pages and we published them in a way that no one knew about. There were no links to it. And in fact, at the moment they were published, the only person in the world who knew what the URLs were was me. That was it. And we actually literally published them by direct FTP upload to the server. So even the publishing system of the website on which it sat, or the domain on which it sat, did not know about the pages. So there were total isolation pages. Okay? And in the code for those pages, there was no Google-related code. No Google Analytics code, no Google Plus code, no Google tools, nothing of that sort. No third-party tools at all, as a matter of fact. And then we had people known to us, hand-selected by me personally, actually, implement Google Plus shares to the pages. And then we waited to see how long it would take them to first get discovered by Google, when they were first indexed by Google. And that's sort of the first step. And then once that had happened, once they were indexed, we then sent more shares to the articles to make sure, or actually see when rankings change and actually measure that.
So, Eric, the world is waiting. What did you find?
About what?
About causation.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I lost track there for a second. What we found actually was very interesting. I'll give you the timeline in a nutshell. I'm going to use 3 example slides to illustrate this for you. Okay, so the first slide here is on a site from one of our participants, a site called buyvia.com. And the first social shares took place on July 19th. 6 shares went to this web page. And it took 10 days before it appeared in the Google Index, which was longer than we suspected it would take. Okay, and the interesting part about this is Googlebot actually visited the web page within 6 minutes of the first share. So the discovery was quick, just right out of the gate. It was there, and Googlebot visited very suddenly. But it took another 10 days before it appeared in the index. And then from that point, we began tracking ranking for some search terms, which was a process of first finding some things for which it was ranking, monitoring and doing daily monitoring of the position. Now, just to be clear, it appeared in the index and began to rank for some search terms, but that doesn't mean at this point that the social shares were causing the ranking.
Because?
Because each page is born with a certain amount of innate authority, and it may be inheriting some authority from the domain. So we don't yet know whether or not it is actually causing ranking. We only know that it got indexed. And I want to be clear about another point too. All through this process, we were measuring whether the pages were obtaining links. So we were using Majestic SEO, Open Site Explorer, Ahrefs, and Webmaster Tools data to assess whether or not the pages were getting links. And for clarity, here's a source of error in the test, which I want to just stress to people who are getting this data, so we understand the limitations of what we're looking at. In my opinion, the cumulative weight of all those sources show only somewhere between 30 and 50% of all the links to a website. So no matter what you do after you pull in from all these data sources, you clearly do not have all the data. But throughout the whole test that I'm revealing to you the results of today, we saw no evidence from the tools available to us, okay, that any links had been received by these pages. So Google may see something different, and that's a source of error, important to know. But as far as I can tell, after 10 days, it got indexed. There were no other signals that were driving that. Okay, so now we're 10 days out, and we decided to let that sort of settle in for a while, and we waited till August 4th before we sent another burst of shares to the website, to the web page. And that burst of shares, about 25 or so shares. And again, these were done all by people friendly to us, direct relationships with. In addition, in the share, we had them include a specific block of text, which encouraged people seeing it or requested people seeing it to not further share it, and to not link to it, and not to plus one it, and these sorts of things. So we wanted to really try to minimize the spread so we knew exactly what was happening. Now, some additional sharing did happen because some people
ignored the message?
They're just like that, you know. So that's the reality of it. But anyway, we do this extra burst of shares on August 4th. We continue to monitor links. We don't see any evidence of linking behavior, any linking behavior. It takes another 20 days. I'm talking to this by via slide, right, that we have. It takes another 20 days before you see an improvement in rankings. That took place on August 24th. That happens to be just slightly after the time frame when people in the SEO community were buzzing about a Google update they believe happened on August 21st. It's a little hard to tell whether it was driven by that or not, and it may well have been. And also the fact that it took 20 days seems very, very long in my opinion, right? And to my view, and I know there are people who have seen this data who disagree with me, to be fair, but to my view, I don't see that as having been caused by the social shares. Time frame seems too long, and the proximity with the Google update seems too close. That's just my opinion.
So then the hypothesis would be that in this Google update, maybe they started counting Google shares, Google Plus shares?
That might be someone's hypothesis. I think that what I've heard is there are people who've looked at the data who believe it just took that long to work its way into the algorithm. And you know, I can't say it's an invalid point of view, but to me, I expect out of social sharing behavior more of a query deserves freshness interaction, something that would happen fairly quickly, not something that would take 3 weeks essentially to happen. So that's just my interpretation of the data. And just to take the study data a little further forward, we actually had another small burst of shares happen between August 28th and September 1st. And that small burst of shares was from highly authoritative Google Plus profiles. Now, you may not know that Google Plus profiles can have PageRank. They do have PageRank. So these were people who had pretty good PageRank in the grand scheme of things in terms of a Google Plus profile. People with many tens of thousands of followers. As of yesterday, according to the data that we're tracking, we have not seen any movement in rankings as a result of that second set of shares that took place. So a little more data to share with you, because we also, in addition to this page, we ran a baseline page, as we called it, where we did only one initial burst of shares all the way back on July 19th, and then did nothing after that. No more shares were done. We just monitored search results. Happened to get indexed on exactly the same date, July 29th, and showed some similar characteristics to the test page. It actually did experience significant improvement in rankings, but instead of on August 24th, it happened on August 31st. So it was a different date. It just took another 7 days for some reason. And it was comparable in scope to what we saw on the test page. So that was a pretty interesting set of data. 2 more data points to share with you. We also ran this test on Stone Temple Consulting's site, stonetemple.com. The results were extremely similar to the BIVIA results, although the dates shifted a little bit. And then there was a third site, Travel New England, where we ran this, and again got indexed on exactly the same date, right? Both test page and baseline pages got indexed on exactly the same date. And that one actually never saw any real ranking change, right? During the course of the entire test. So that's what the raw data says.
So Eric, interpret then for all the marketers who have tuned in, what do they do tomorrow? Does this mean the jury's still out on Google Plus? Does it mean quick, start using Google Plus? What would your takeaway be?
Well, a few things I want to say about that. First of all, I mean, there are people who are interpreting the very same data we just talked about and that we just showed you differently than I do, okay? And that's the nature of our beast in this industry, right? But my interpretation of the data is that the movements we've seen are in the noise. In other words, we see the baseline page, which had only that initial set of shares, showing similar scope moving. Dates are different, yes, but similar scope movement to what we're seeing on the test pages. And I walk away from this and saying that a Google Plus share, even though that link shares does pass PageRank, is not being used like a regular web link. That's just my interpretation, okay? That does not cause me to want to not use Google Plus, if you can unravel that sentence I just gave you. I am actively using Google Plus. I committed heavily to that about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and it's fairly recent, but now I'm all in. And it's because for the work that we do in our business, there's a rich, vibrant community with tons of people looking for information. It's a great place to build reputation and visibility. Again, to my view, if the community is there for your market space, you should be there. In my view, Google Plus is the best content sharing network. The other social networks have their own strengths and weaknesses. For content sharing, it's Google Plus. So if you're trying to do a content marketing strategy, a fantastic place to be.
So Eric, I understand there's going to be a hangout on there where you're going to explain all of this in gory detail. Why don't you tell the viewers out there how they can join?
I'll be glad to. I'm really excited about this. September 19th, 4 p.m. Eastern Time. Mark it in your calendars. This coming Thursday. We're going to have a great panel of people talking about the study, as well as the own great research that they've done, and who we have coming. We have Mark Traphagen from Verante. We have Pete Myers from Moz. We have Marcus Tober from Searchmetrics, and we have Joshua Berg of Real SMO. All these people have done a lot of research in this area. The people who have done the correlation studies we've spoken about, and again, I think their work is fantastic. But we're going to dig in, we're going to talk about the data that we have here, how to interpret it, what it means, and how you should think about it. And I can promise you that there are diverging opinions as to how to interpret the data. I mentioned that earlier in our talk already. But I think it should be a great discussion, be an opportunity for you to see all the people who are talking about this in a single place at one time.
So let me just conclude here with one last takeaway.
Mm-hmm.
Does this mean that Matt Cutts has been telling the truth?
Well, you know, it's funny. I'm going to give a slightly complicated answer to that. I think people are going to really argue with what I'm just about to tell you. I think he doesn't really lie. Matt has a role that he has to fill, and he sometimes won't get into things that he doesn't need to or doesn't want to get into. I'm sure there's definitely the basis of truth in what he's saying. The data I have and the way I interpret it makes me think that he's fundamentally correct in the statements. I actually do personally believe that in some way Google Plus will be involved in the algorithm, and there may be more indirect ways it's involved. We shouldn't leave out the notion of personalization. It is absolutely a big factor in personalization. We've all probably seen those Google Plus posts that show up high in the search results, and that's guided by people that you're interacting with. And I think if you have a high authority Google Plus profile, those are going to show up more often for people than if you don't. And that is search, and that is SEO right there. So keep in mind, the study that we've been talking about is for non-personalized results, right? Keep that in mind as you think about what you've heard me say in this video. So I think there's a very real impact there to think about. But back to your question, right now where I sit, I don't actually see Google Plus shares directly driving non-personalized ranking.
Well, there you have it. Some very complex information, but you know what? That's the nature of the search industry. I'm Greg Jarboe for Search Engine Watch. And again, there's a Google Hangout on air, and you can go Thursday and get more information from Eric Enge and Stone Temple Consulting.